Last year, after this summit, we did our usual survey and asked people what they thought and suggestions and that sort of thing. And one of the comments that came back, which really stuck with me, was that a person expressed some concern. I've forgotten how they said it, but they expressed some concern about how it all came together. You know, we heard a little bit about this, a little bit about P3 and pensions, and how do we select our programs? Excellent thought. Basically, it's what are the issues in Kentucky? That's what drives the agenda for the summit. And the challenge is that we have folks in the audience, including myself, on certain topics where we're kind of the uninitiated. We haven't really thought about pensions before, perhaps. And so all this is new, and it gets pretty deep in the weeds. There are other people in the audience who are policymakers. We have legislators here. We have CEOs here. We have the state budget director. Some of the administration's been in and out. Policymakers who live and breathe this stuff every day. And so they're comfortable with it, and they want to get deeper. So trying to find the right balance can be pretty challenging. So this session, for just a few minutes here, we're going to try to put it in a box, try to put a ribbon around it, maybe a bow on the top, try to make sense out of what all these various topics are. And I realize that some of this has been very deep in the weeds. If you had told me 10 years ago, when I was coming back, 11 years ago, when I was coming back to Kentucky, that within a couple years I'd be knee-deep in issues like public pensions, I would have said, stick a hot poker in my eye, because that's not my deal. I'd rather have a red-hot poker in the eye. But it's become a huge, dominant issue in this state. And whether or not, for example, whether or not Kentucky converts teachers to, future teachers, to a defined contribution plan, a 401k type of thing, versus what they've got, huge issue. And so we got into that a little bit today. By the way, Governor Bevin, and Brian Sunderland mentioned this, but Governor Bevin attended these summits for the last few years as a private citizen sitting on the back row with a legal pad, soaking it in. How much of that affected what he said during his campaign? I've wondered, I need to ask him this sometime, his whole emphasis on, for example, Chairman Graham, the performance-based funding. Did he just read that in a magazine, or did he grow up thinking about that? Probably not. But those are the things we've been talking about here at this summit for the last few years. And so some of the concepts that now, like we talked about P3 becoming the new law, that was first discussed here 3 years ago and kind of, I think, introduced to a lot of folks. So anyhow, those of you who will be attending this summit, perhaps the only time you'll have the opportunity to attend this summit, if you digested even a fraction of what's been said here, you're probably more informed than 99.9% of the Kentucky public. Other people who are experts in their fields get really into this. Hopefully we help advance the conversation. So with that, if I can find the clicker, that's what I call the remote at home too. My kids think that's funny. Last year, we introduced the 4 Pillars for Prosperity as a strategic plan for the Commonwealth. Now, admittedly, we did that kind of in a rushed fashion. I mean, it took months, but I mean, it wasn't a 3-year strategic planning process. We did it to introduce it during the governor's race. We wanted to affect the dialogue of the governor's race. We were plain spoken about that. And so we introduced the 4 pillars. Now, what are the 4 pillars? Here we go. A healthy, skilled workforce, a sustainable state government. And by the way, we looked at a bunch of other states and their plans. None of the other ones had this one in it. And we have it in there primarily because of our pension problem in Kentucky. Our state's in trouble. So a sustainable state government, 21st century infrastructure, and aggressive job creation. Those were the 4 pillars that came out of weeks and months of deliberation, surveys of business people, chamber members, etc. So let's look. Let me just give you a little wrap-up of what's happened in the last year on these 4 pillars. Oh, by the way, with the 4 pillars report we did, we also had strategies under each. We didn't just say, hey, we're for these 4 things. We came up with over 50 strategies, specific things that needed to be done under those. How do we measure the progress? We call them building blocks. And if you want to look at our report, it's online at kychamber.com, and you can see what they are. And then we put a dashboard on our website. Go to the Kentucky Chamber website. There's a dashboard there, and you can see the various measurements under each of the pillars. For example, if I can read one, under sustainable state government, the state debt per capita. How much have we put on the credit card? You can go there, and if you can go out and actually, in most of the cases, compare it to other states through a little interactive deal that's pretty neat. Anyhow, so that's there 24/7, anytime you want to check it. So let's talk about the 4 pillars. Last year, Diana Taylor here, our consultant, wrote a workforce paper called Kentucky's Workforce Challengers from an employer's perspective. And we introduced that last year. So under the skilled workforce, number one, we researched it and tried to get our arms around what's going on with workforce training in Kentucky. Secondly, that report, the big, lot of recommendations. The big one was we need to get more business people involved. We've got to get folks actively engaged in developing workforce strategies. Not just in their companies, I mean, they do that, but involved in public programs and the decision process. We suggest that more transparency is needed. This is a whole topic for a whole nother speech, but the way the programs, most of it's federal dollars, coming through the state, going down to regional entities like area development districts. Frankly, in Lexington and Bowling Green, the business community has revolted against the way some of that has taken place, and they've demanded change. It's been very controversial, but we are very much for more transparency so you see where the dollars are going, and we focus on ROI, return on investment. You put X number of dollars into this kind of training program, how many people got placed? How many, are there jobs in that field even available? Those kinds of things. So an emphasis on return on investment. Moving forward on the workforce thing, we're going to be focusing a whole lot more on employability skills. That goes by a bunch of different names. Some people call it soft skills. It's the ability to show up for work, work in teams, communicate, be drug-free, you know, the thing. And that, by the way, comes back as the most resounding response from employers when you talk about their workforce challenges. You heard a little bit up here today about drug issues. Ursula Burns even mentioned that. So employability skills is huge. There's some interesting pilot projects going on in Hardin County, for example, some of our community colleges where they're building it into the curriculum. Secondly, moving forward on higher education. This is a meeting the other day. You see state budget. John Chilton is here somewhere. There he is. See, we put your picture on there. He was actually at this seminar. He was awake when we took this picture. And this was about performance-based funding. How do we reward our universities for what they produce rather than just writing a check based on what kind of check they got last year? So we're very engaged in that with the Pritchard Committee. We're very interested in accountability. You heard it from Commissioner Pruitt today. He's all over this accountability issue. We'll be at the table helping think through how do we make our educational system accountable at the school level, district level, student level, and state level. So, moving forward, we hope within the next few weeks, matter of fact, I was hoping to be able to announce it today, we want to create, and the funding is not quite shored up, but we want to create within the chamber a workforce center so we can be more engaged on this topic that is the topic among business people right now, and that's workforce. All right, so that's under the healthy and skilled workforce pillar, pillar number one. Number two, a sustainable state government. What do you mean by that? You mean a state government, in our version, that provides basic services, pays its bills, and keeps its promises. Parentheses, pensions, for example. I know that those are broad statements, but it kind of boils down to that. A sustainable state government. One concern we have about the Medicaid issue right now is it sustainable? It's not whether we're for or against Medicaid or certain people getting health insurance. Yeah, we're all for that. But is it sustainable within our state's resources? Now, these hearings that the governor's been having, you know, his people been out there and they get all beat up because everybody says, well, we want dental and we want vision and we want psychiatric services and we want prenatal. I mean, sure, we all want that. The question is, are you willing to take textbooks away from school kids in order to pay for that? The budget of the state is that big. It's got to come from somewhere. So that's the sustainability questions I think we have to debate. We formed a pension task force, mostly bankers, some of you here in the room, bankers, investors, finance people, a few attorneys and accountants in there, to really focus the chamber's thought process on the pension issue, which is, as I said, the dominant issue. We brought in the Pew Charitable Trust. They were here 3 years ago in the state of Kentucky. They kind of helped broker the compromise between the Democratic House and the Republican Senate on what to do about the state and local workers' pension, Kentucky retirement system, not teachers, Kentucky retirement system. And so we asked them, come back, give us a 3-year checkup, and they did, and they reported to our task force the other day, basically said that based on those reforms made in 2013, which were substantial, basically moved all future state and local workers to a defined contribution plan, now with a 4% guaranteed per year. Most of us don't have that in our 401ks, but there's a 4% guarantee each year, and 17,000 state and local workers have been hired since that law went into place and are now under that new system. That doesn't help you much on the short term, but in the out years, it's that hockey stick. You get a lot of savings in the out years. I think $10 billion over the next decade. So, but he said, so we're on track. His verdict was, we're on track, but there's a whole lot more work to do. We're not out of the woods yet, especially with the teacher system, which was not the focus of their 2013 reforms. We've called for an audit of the retirement systems. We congratulate Governor Bevin and his administration, putting $3 million in his budget to bring in auditors. The request for proposals has gone out. The proposals have come in. I think that's to be selected, John, by when? Do you know? About a month. And then I think the job has to be done by December 1 or December 31, doesn't it? 31. So they're going to bring in some heavyweight national consultants with pension expertise to look at the pension system. We sent them a list of, I don't know, 2 dozen questions. We think you ought to look at this. And sure enough, all those things are in there. So it's going to be a comprehensive thing, and I think it's going to really affect the dialogue as to how we go forward on this big, bad pension system, a pension problem. We've called for a top-to-bottom review, too. We called for this under the previous governor. We still hope that it will take place. What does that mean? Bring in consultants and look at state government, like you would bring into a corporation and look at your IT systems or your HR systems. And we asked the Pew Trust again, tell us what's going on in the other 50 states in terms of bringing in consultants to look at your operating systems and that sort of thing. They came back with basically 4 areas where they see these kinds of things, where you bring in Deloitte, or you bring in Mercer, or Accenture, IBM, other ones. Information technology, human resources, audits, and strategy and operations. Those are the 4 areas that typically state governments have brought in that kind of expertise. Now, the Bevin administration, frankly, has their hands full right now with this pension issue, and they're bringing in consultants to look at that, because that is front burner in Kentucky. But we hope that this type of thinking will also affect future decisions down the road to come in and look at systems. For example, under HR, look at the work rules. Look at how seniority plays into job satisfaction, into taxpayer efficiency, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of room, and that hasn't been done in at least 1 decade, probably at least 2 decades in Kentucky, in a comprehensive way. Now, sustainable state government. Our leaky bucket report in 2009 pointed out some leaks in the state's bucket. In other words, things that were draining dollars or siphoning off dollars that we thought ought to be going to education and economic development, the stuff that folks in this room would think of as priorities. But they were going into building prisons and Medicaid cost and public employee benefits. Prisons, in 2008, we were locking up people in this state faster than any of the other 50 states. And when you remind people, especially business people, that, oh, by the way, it takes $20,000 a year to put somebody in prison, and that would pay for 3 people to go to community college. You go, oh, well. So you have to back up and say, can we afford all this stuff? Getting tough on crime comes with a price tag. So a lot of reforms have been made already. And matter of fact, I was invited to Washington, I think, last week by the Pew Trust to kind of give a report, and they hold Kentucky up as a model now of things that have been done by the legislature and the governor. 2011, corrections reform, kind of rewrote a big bunch of the penal code. Ask questions like, can we afford to put somebody in prison for $20,000 a year that has low-level, nonviolent drug offenses? Or should we put them in something more efficient, like a community-based treatment program? 2014, juvenile justice reforms. Kentucky really did a lot at that time. Felony expungement, you heard that bragged about in this session, or on the video last night, because that was one of the major bills that got through the legislature this time. It had been introduced for 10 years. Admittedly, the business community didn't think of it as a business issue. We hadn't really been engaged. You know, it was more of a social justice issue. The faith community, churches and others were concerned about it. We got interested because it was a workforce issue, and with the workforce issues coming to the forefront of businesses, we got more involved. So we joined the Smart on Crime Coalition. That bill got passed when everybody finally got on the same wavelength. And frankly, we were kind of late to the parade in the sense that it wasn't our issue until we said, wait, it is our issue. Going forward, there's talk about reclassifying Class D felonies, and Chairman Yantz is in the audience here. He'll be speaking in just a minute, actually on a broader topic, but he's been heavily involved. Are there certain felonies that could be reclassified in such a way that would reduce prison and incarceration costs? And then also, Governor Bevin has just appointed the Criminal Justice Council. He asked me to serve on that. Most of them are legislators, a few interest groups like the Chamber, to talk about what else is there we need to look at in terms of our justice code that helps us be more smart on crime as opposed to hard on crime or soft on crime. How can we be smart on crime? So, controlling prison cost is huge. Now, under infrastructure, that's the third pillar. The big deal, you've heard about it, P3. It is a big deal. Kentucky was slow to do this. But at this summit 3 years ago, it was unveiled. We pushed for 3 years, had problems, but this year, strong bipartisan support, and I think you'll see it make a huge difference in Kentucky. Secretary Don Parkinson, who was on the panel on tourism, was a major voice within the administration convincing them we've got to have P3 if we're going to update the park system in Kentucky. So, and you heard about roads and bridges and that sort of thing, but it's parks, it's a bunch of stuff. And local governments will benefit greatly. So that was introduced here a few years ago. We lobbied for it for 3 years. There's our two co-sponsors there, Republican Senator, Democratic House Member Leslie Combs, Max Wise. We put together a coalition, you know, contractors and others, engineers, architects, everybody wanted P3. Local governments, there we were. And you heard about the seminar we're going to be offering on October 27th, 28th to help people come to grips with the potential of P3. Now, moving forward on infrastructure, I've already looked at a draft. I get louder when I lean over to already looked at a draft of a comprehensive infrastructure report. And by that, it's a bunch of stuff. It's roads, it's airplanes, it's broadband, it's bridges, it's sewers, you name it. We need to look at the infrastructure in Kentucky. We heard Ray LaHood this morning gave a great speech about that. Last year, our chamber lobbied heavily for changing the formula of the gas tax in Kentucky, because with gas prices going down, more people driving Priuses, there just wasn't enough money coming into the coffers. And so we lobbied pretty hard and successfully got that formula changed to where it protects that fund so we can pave the potholes. Let's see. Now, the last pillar, aggressive job creation. We're concerned about the workforce participation rate. Now, what is that? You know the unemployment rate. You hear it every month. Employment rate's kind of the other part of that. Workforce participation, how many able-bodied adults are basically working? I mean, there's a technical definition, but that's a layman's definition. How many people work? And Kentucky doesn't look very good in this department. We are ranked 46th in the country. We're 65% of adults, 70% in the U.S. If we got up to the national average, we'd have 130,000 more people in the workforce. Now, what is that? It's a cultural phenomenon. It's an economic phenomenon. Some people are truly disabled. Some people who have worked in the mines are truly disabled. Others are on disability but not disabled. In some counties, and this is a little controversial perhaps, but I'll say it, in some counties, being on disability has become a career aspiration. Granddaddy was on disability, I want to get on disability. I want to get on the dole. And we can't have our culture, that's a problem. We've got to address that issue, and I know Secretary Hal Heiner spoke to our board yesterday of the chamber and just gave an impassioned speech that we've got to find who these 130,000 people are and how can we get them gainfully trained and employed. This is a map. I won't go into great detail, but the darker the blue, the more people there are in the workforce, in the participation rate. So it's basically the golden triangle we talk about sometimes, Bowling Green, Owensboro, Paducah area, roughly, where you are up in the, 67 to 77% range. It's basically the others are the rural areas where we have a less than average workforce participation rate. Also under aggressive job creation, and in just a minute you'll hear a few more details, we have partnered with Awesome Inc. in Lexington to co-produce and co-sponsor the Entrepreneurs Hall of Fame. This was last year's a few years ago, these were the inductees into the Hall of Fame. Every year a few new ones are announced. In just a minute you'll hear the new ones for this year announced for the first time. So we're going to celebrate entrepreneurism. A couple other things. We want to look at regional strategies. These are what we call the 9 economies of Kentucky. I like to say that there is no such thing as a Kentucky economy. You know, the mountain area is so different from the Purchase area, it's so different from Louisville. And so with our economic consultant, Dr. Paul Coombs, we've divided these as 9 separate economies based on commuting patterns, media markets, etc. So therefore, we think they deserve distinct economic development strategies. And there is no economic development strategy that's not really a workforce strategy these days. And so we need to look at industry sectors. What is going on in that region in manufacturing? What's going on in healthcare? And develop specific strategies along that. So we're going to be pursuing that under the topic of aggressive job creation. So those are the 4 pillars: workforce, state government, infrastructure, and job creation. Hopefully that helps you think in terms of all this stuff you've heard, all this stuff you've hopefully absorbed some of, put it in a package, put a ribbon around it, and put a bow on top. That's a vision for moving forward. Now, we didn't bring these down on stone tablets from Mount Sinai. This is the Chamber's view. A consensus view by business people all over the state. Other people would have a different view. Elected officials have their own view of how we need to move forward, but at least it was our attempt to put forward, here are the things that we think will move the Commonwealth forward.